This is John from Church History for Chumps, and I'm here with the number one chump in my heart and probably yours,
Thomas.
Thomas doing?
From Church History for Chumps.
Yeah. All right. Welcome, Thomas. How are you, man?
Doing good, man.
Yeah.
It's good to see you.
Likewise.
Good to be back in the booth. We took a couple weeks off.
Yeah, now we got to take a couple weeks on. So
right.
we got to catch up a little bit. But yeah, man, I'm feeling good. Hey, I want to tell you something.
Yeah.
I listened to Dead Throne.
Oh, I was going to ask you about this.
Yes, sir, I did. You know, I just want to build the suspense a little bit. It's hard. I'll say that. It's hard to listen to the album that came out right after I kind of stopped listening to that band for a long time. Because, like, I think Plagues, I'm not sure if there's an album to this day that I've listened to more than Plagues.
Really?
Because of how much I listened to it in high school.
Wow.
Like, I listened to it nonstop. And then with Roots Above, I still really liked. And then I just kind of got away from listening to metal for a bunch of years.
Yeah.
So listening to Dead Throne kind of felt like having a conversation with somebody who I hadn't talked to in a long time.
Yeah.
And it was different. And I was like, man, it's really heavy, but I don't know if I like it. And then I went back and I listened to Plagues and I listened to With Roots Above. And then I listened to Dead Throne again.
Plagues is heavier than Dead Throne, I think.
I don't know. Here's what it is. I think that Dead Throne is like relentlessly heavy. Plagues is heavy, but there's like more breaks. There's more synth. Like they kind of play with the pacing a little better.
Yeah.
And then Dead Throne is just like brr, 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 like heavy.
Yep.
But I liked it.
Okay.
Yeah. Should I listen to anything else?
What was your favorite track off of Dead Throne?
Probably crap. What is it called? Mammoth is really good.
That's a really good one.
But then it's not Ready to Die. It's like Born to Serve.
Born to Lose.
Born to Lose.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's a killer one too.
So, little bit of interesting trivia. One of my favorite songs off that album is the song Constance. And I don't know if you noticed, but that one features Tim Lambesis of As I Lay Dying.
I did not know that.
On that song.
Was that before the scandal?
It was before, it was before the Hitman controversy.
Now, here's a real good question. Did you listen to As I Lay Dying's comeback album after Tim got out of prison and the band forgave him?
No.
Are you like boycotting it?
Nah.
You're just not feeling it?
Nah, I just haven't listened. As I Lay Dying was like the first metal band that I got exposed to and listened to. I wish I could remember what the name of the first track was. I feel like it was like the first like metal song I ever heard.
Yeah.
And I liked some of their stuff, but then I really moved away from listening to their music, not because I was mad at Tim. How could he do that to his wife?
What are you doing, man?
It was more just like... it was always too fast for me. It was. I don't know like what the style is, but it's like the double bass doesn't stop the whole time. A lot of blast beats, and
a lot of shredding.
Yeah,
it's a different flavor of metal. I get it. Yeah. The best thing about that whole era where As I Lay Dying. So for the listeners who didn't expect to get some church history, metal history, As I Lay Dying was a probably top 5 most influential metal bands of that time period. They were up there with like Under Oath, August Burns Red. They were like massive. They were like not headlining, but they were going to shows like South by Southwest and stuff like that. They had like a screeching halt because their lead singer Tim Lambesis was arrested for hiring a hitman to murder his wife. And then I think the hitman was an undercover cop, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so he got
Don't hire a hitman on Craigslist.
Yeah. You got to go on the dark. Nope. Actually, I'm not going to tell you how to do that because we're Christians.
You know what's funny? I was recently having a conversation with a few friends about like why are almost all of the Christian metal bands apostate, like in the end. And there was a really good comment made that it's what happens when you're on the road all the time, not connected to your local church.
Yeah, well, dude, I was going to say, I remember reading an interview that Associated Press did with Haste the Day. And they asked a very similar question, like what does this happening to like the premier Christian metal band say about like just the content, and they were basically like, well, for one, a lot of these Christian metal bands are really not Christian. They start off Christian, then they all kind of lose it along the way, but they don't want to lose their fan bases, which is a big thing. But also, some Christian metal bands, like, they're just these 19-year-old kids who can play bass really well and go on tour with like a flaming heart for ministry, and then they're just subjected to drugs and alcohol and girls and popularity, and you just burn out because they don't have like a church, they don't have like a foundation.
Yeah.
And it just kind of kills them over time.
There's only a few success stories. One of them is kind of a success. Well, it is a success story, but it's not what you think. Yeah. I was just watching a podcast the other day that was featuring a CREC pastor named Brooks Pottinger, and like just watching this interview, and all of a sudden it's revealed he tells a story of how he started the band Under Oath. Like, he grew up in Florida, and he and his brother started a band. He's like, it was like all the other hardcore bands at the time. If you were Christians, you just open the Bible and you look for cool words. And I found I can't remember if it was one word or if he just saw the words under and oath near each other, and he's like, Under Oath. So he's like, we named the band Under Oath. And then he left the band, I think, before they ever had a show.
Yeah.
But he named it, and he had, I think it was his brother, he said, or someone else in the band got it tatted, I think, on their neck, on their throat. And then they got kicked out of the band within a year.
Dang, what a curse.
Yeah. But anyway, there's a CREC pastor out there who named and started Under Oath.
Yeah.
But didn't stick with it.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for listening to us, and thanks for that little banter aside. We'll get to the content now, because we work for you guys. You're holding the whip here, I guess. But yeah, we're gonna talk about Gnosticism today, which feels long overdue, doesn't it?
Yeah, I feel like we've teased a Gnosticism episode a few times, or we've referenced when we do our Gnosticism episode.
Yeah,
but I don't think today's even going to be like a deep dive. It's like we really just need to talk about it. And
it's a flyover. Yeah. It's a flyover. And I want to say, if you saw Gnosticism and you were like, finally, the deep cut, like very, very rich exploration of not, like, you might have to go on YouTube for a bit. Like, we might do that later. We hopefully will. But Gnosticism is a very complex and complicated system, and there's a ton of texts and writings, and there's a lot of influence about them. We're mostly going to talk about kind of the main ideas of Gnosticism that were so dangerous to the church back in the 2nd century, but then we're going to spend a lot of time talking about how these Gnostic ideas are still very prevalent, I would say, in and outside of the church today. And so we'll get into that. Quick fun fact, Thomas, did you know that there was a Gnostic gospel called the Gospel of Judas, where Judas was like obedient in his betrayal of Jesus?
So I knew that there was a Gospel of Judas, but I didn't know that was
he's like the good guy.
The angle.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
It's like he needed to do that to get Jesus to the plane of enlightenment, I guess.
That makes me think of like the Peace Child book, where I forget where these missionaries were ministering, but they told the gospel story to these people, and they thought Judas was the hero.
Oh yeah. That was from Perspectives, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's the account is in the book Peace Child.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. It's like Judas was the clever one,
right?
And because
in
he
their
pulled
culture,
one over,
yeah. If you could trick people and get ahead, like that was considered a good trait.
Yeah, he was the hero of the Bible. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a wild take.
Yeah.
That's not what we're saying though, But hey, let's talk a little about Gnosticism. So Gnosticism, for all of you etymology nerds out there, comes from the Greek word gnosis, or just gnosis, because you don't pronounce the G when the N is there, which means knowledge. And it's, in this context, it's not so much knowledge like just knowing things. It's almost like having an enlightened state. It's a very deep kind of Greek philosophical kind of knowledge.
Kind of like third eye kind of thing.
Very much so, yeah. And I like that you referenced that, because yeah, that's a huge place where Gnosticism still exists today. But yeah, so Gnosticism was a worldview that kind of developed in and around the Christian/Jewish faith around the 1st and 2nd centuries. And it's actually really hard to define it cleanly because it has so many different iterations and ways that it affects the church or even outside of the church that it's hard to really nail down. There are a few themes that often kind of twist their head at us. And for those of you guys who have really tuned in for our Heresies series, you'll probably recognize how Gnosticism has affected a lot of the heresies that we've talked about. And so Gnosticism kind of starts with this creation myth. It's very, very crucial to their worldview that in the beginning, the creation did not come from the all-powerful, all-knowing, all-benevolent God of the universe, but creation came about from the demiurge, who was a lower god who kind of existed in this submissive state to the all-powerful ethereal God. And the demiurge created everything physical and material, which leads to maybe one of the most important tenets of Gnosticism, which is that because all that is material has come from the evil demiurge, everything that's matter is inherently corrupt. And so essentially, if you're a Gnostic, you've acknowledged this kind of Neoplatonic, that's kind of a fancy word meaning like kind of taking the ideas of Plato and putting a newer spin on them. This idea that we are, like, our personhood as human beings is spirits that are kind of trapped in this prison that is our human body, and we're just trying to achieve whatever means possible to transcend this broken, ugly physical existence and to return to this like peaceful spiritual thing.
So this demiurge, which sounds a lot like Demogorgon to me.
Yeah.
This demiurge, when they pick up the Old Testament scriptures, they would read Yahweh as this character, right?
Yes.
Like this evil, kind of like angry God.
Yeah, a Christian Gnostic would most likely see the God of the Old Testament as the evil demiurge, which, and I want to say this is right, the guy who coined the term demiurge was actually Marcion. From the heresy Marcionism. And so if you guys remember, if you listen to that episode, Marcionism is all about this idea that the God of the Old Testament is an oppressive, evil God, and that Jesus represents this spirit God whose whole sole purpose is to help us transcend from the evil creation that we're in. So yeah, if you were a Gnostic Christian, you most likely did not read the Old Testament like, oh, this guy's cool.
Yeah, it's like a good cop, bad cop kind of situation.
Big time. So another big part of Gnosticism, which definitely ties into the whole idea of knowledge, is they were big believers in this concept of secret wisdom. And it was partially this idea, almost kind of an elitist, very like exclusive idea that not everybody is cut out to be truly enlightened. Like that some people just kind of have that special sauce to be able to understand the things of the universe, but most people don't. And so a big theme that you'll see a lot in Gnostic kind of teachings is like this secret wisdom. And even like, you know, if you look at passages in the Bible, you can kind of misinterpret some of them to make it seem like when Jesus is talking about like, yeah, some people will hear but they won't really hear it. Like a Gnostic would read that and be like, oh, whoa, yeah, he's talking about me, like I've got the sauce but these people don't.
Right.
And if you guys remember our episode on Montanism was again all about secret wisdom. That's why they liked Paul's literature, even though he was Oh wait, no, I'm thinking about Marcius. But secret wisdom, also a big thing in Montanism too.
So my perception of Gnosticism, and you can kind of tell me if you think this is correct or not.
Yeah.
It seems like there's like dark roast Gnosticism that's like there's like a full-on like pantheon of gods. It's like really committed to this origin story of the universe that involves the demiurge. And, but then it seems like in church history, and even maybe at the time of in the first century, you have kind of just like variations of it.
Yeah.
Like groups that are more or less influenced by these ideas, groups that are kind of operating maybe even a little bit more out of the Christian story, but they've really adopted this framework of spirit good, material things bad.
Yes. Yeah, I think that where this is actually kind of a guess, so if we've got a historian listening, feel free to shoot us an angry email or a happy email, because we like both. I think that where Gnosticism interacted with Judaism more is kind of where you get like the pantheon and the more of the emphasis on the demiurge. I see Gnosticism in a lot of Christian heresies. I don't see as much emphasis on all of that like deep cut lore, unless it's like more overtly Gnostic, because like when you look at Docetism, which was one of the first heresies that we covered, which is the idea that Jesus was like this spirit guy who looked like a person but wasn't really human. That's a very Gnostic idea, and that's an idea that continues to come up, that Jesus could not degrade himself to be material because he was the one to rescue us from what's material. And that's a very, very Gnostic idea. And then again, we already talked about how the evil God motif we see in Marcionism and its kind of resentment towards the Old Testament and the Jewish faith, the secret wisdom of Montanism. So Gnosticism, I think the reason it's so hard to nail down is it's not one monolith worldview. It's actually just kind of this collection of ideas that were so appealing that they would appear in tiny little, kind of like across a spectrum.
Yeah. I feel like that's why we use the word Gnostic more than we say Gnosticism.
Yeah.
Gnosticism, I think, speaks to kind of like the broader framework, but we'll use the word Gnostic to describe things that have been influenced by Gnosticism, which, as I'm sure we'll talk about here, goes throughout like the last couple thousand years.
Yeah. I want to read, there was a text that was printed on the inside of a church pamphlet. It was a poem that has some very like overtly Gnostic themes to it. And it's interesting just like how...
I was going to make a joke about like a famous modern church, but I'm not going to.
Oh my gosh.
Just imagine your favorite church you like to pick on.
Need I remind you of your apology to Richard Rohr that you made a few months back?
I don't remember apologizing to Richard Rohr. Maybe I need to listen to it again.
Like I wasn't apologizing to him. All right, here we go. It's by Robert Browning. It goes, truth is within ourselves. It takes no rise from outward things, whatever you may believe. There is an inmost center in us all where truth abides in fullness, and around, wall upon wall, the gross flesh hems it in. This perfect, clear perception, which is truth, a baffling and perverting carnal mesh binds it and makes all error, and to know rather consists in opening a way whence the imprisoned splendor may escape than in effecting entry for a light supposed to be without. So, yeah.
You know how this is striking me is it seems like a different way of coping and struggling with the reality of the world that we live in. That's almost the opposite of kind of what the Jewish perception was when Jesus comes on the scene. So like the Jews were really looking for a material, like tangible conquest of Rome that was going to liberate them. And they were looking for like a real life reality of the Messiah. And Jesus did no less than that, but not in the way they wanted. And so now it seems like as you have Christians now starting to live through the first couple hundred years of church history, things aren't just like automatically fixed. Like we talk about we use the language of already not yet. The kingdom of God is invaded in the middle of history, but things are now unfolding. And so it's like people are wrestling with this and they're going, well, like, I guess it's just all about like the spiritual.
Yes. And so for those of you who are like, how does this like weird kind of Greek idea really connect with us today as, modern 2024, people? And I would say the easiest way to flesh that out is flesh that out. That was good. Is I think Gnosticism is escapism. I think wherever we have this idea that there is a true self within you, a true pure spirit being, that your body is kind of like this prison cell over, I think that is modern day Gnosticism. And I think that, the seminary that Thomas and I went to has this kind of running joke about how terrible the hymn I'll Fly Away is, which is hard because I think it's very catchy, but it's got this theme of like, when I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. Like when I finally die, I'll be released from this horrible place, this horrible prison, and I'll be floating around as this free, ethereal spirit, just untainted by the physical grossness of broken creation. And that's heavily Gnostic. It's this idea that the spirit is where that our redemption is through the spirit, is through experiencing the spiritual reality, but that there's no physical presence there. That is a very, very Gnostic thing. Honestly, like I'll say a really relatable one. People who don't take care of their bodies, but think that going to church, reading their Bibles, praying every day is like necessary for their well-being. I think that's a form of Gnosticism. Like if you're letting your body just decay because you're like, well, whatever, I get a new one later, but you're valuing your spiritual health, I think that's Gnostic.
Yep. Same thing with I am not like an environmentalist in any sense of the wherever that starts to get political, but Christians who would say something like, oh, well, God's just going to destroy the earth someday, therefore like doesn't really matter, like we don't need to pay attention to the climate, or we don't need to pay attention to like if a animal species goes extinct, like whatever, like God's gonna destroy it one day. It's like, actually, first of all, he's not.
Right.
Second of all, that's Gnostic.
Yeah. And I mean, I think really what like the alternative that we would offer to this Gnostic idea is not that the spirit doesn't matter. We would actually say that it's both. Like, I just preached on Sunday on the first few verses of Mark chapter 2, where Jesus has the paralytic man lowered down to him, and he forgives his sins, and then he heals his body. And I thought, this is such an amazing, like, perfect example of like Jesus identifying what the holistic healing that the human experience needs is, that humans need to be that humans need to be healed in their physical selves, but also in their spiritual selves. And I think we often kind of miss that idea.
Yeah. When we read the New Testament, we see the New Testament writers, in particular John, big time, dealing with what some scholars might call like proto-Gnostics. So before some of the real Gnostic heresies get going, we see John in particular having to start to deal with some heresies in the earliest church, where there was this temptation to kind of divide the physical and the spiritual. And we see John intentionally using words and language that would be used by the Gnostics, that words they really like, light, logos, like the word.
Yep.
These words are big time components of kind of the Gnostic way of describing the world that we live in, and John uses those very words. Even the way that he begins his gospel.
Yeah.
In the beginning was the Logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then when he starts First John, we see him starting to kind of attack this idea of either Jesus only being a spirit or physical things not mattering. So just listen to how First John starts now with this framework of proto-Gnosticism. What was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have observed with our hands concerning the word of life. That life was revealed, and we have seen it. And we testify and declare to you the eternal life that was with the Father and was revealed to us. And then he starts talking about Jesus. And then a little later on in chapter 2, I think about now in your church in the 1st century or 2nd century, you're dealing with someone who's like, yeah, man, like it doesn't really matter what you do with your body. Doesn't really matter what you eat. Doesn't really matter who you sleep with, because it's what really matters is that you kind of achieve this enlightenment, this higher knowledge. You need to receive this light. And John says in 1 John 2:9, he says, the one who says he is in the light but hates his brother is in the darkness until now.
Yeah.
The one who loves his brother remains in the light, and there is no cause for stumbling in him. But the one who hates his brother is in the darkness, walks in the darkness, and doesn't know where he's going, because the darkness has blinded his eyes. So John's like, hey, like, yeah, enlightenment is a real thing. Like, you need to be enlightened by the Holy Spirit in order to be alive.
Yeah, it's almost like a Gnostic would say that Jesus was the one who brings about the light and the truth, but the Christian response is Jesus is the light and the truth.
Yeah, that's
like
good.
He's not the one who brings this intangible concept to life. Like, he is the realization of that truth, light, peace, all that stuff. I have this idea that I've been thinking about that I'd like to share with you, Tommy.
Sounds good.
I think that Gnosticism, in many of its iterations, is a response to trauma. I think that one of the reasons why... Okay, so I've got a secular example. I've got a Christian example. My secular
There you
example,
go with your Gnosticism.
Yeah, there we go. Oh no, I did it! It was me all along. Okay, secular example, and I'm going to tread very lightly and respectfully, but I would say the trans community is an example of Gnosticism.
Oh man, yeah, here we go. No, I so agree with you already. So keep going.
I think that
Speak on it.
And I'm saying all of this knowing that we have listeners from all over the place, and that every human being, regardless of
everyone on the planet listens to our podcast.
That's true. Yeah, everyone listens. No, this is not any kind of veiled way to treat people with less love, respect, kindness than they deserve, or that we are commanded to. But the transgender theology, I'll call it a theology, is rooted in this idea that our innermost being is represented in a way that sometimes our physical state does not reflect. And it is our responsibility to express that inner pure soul, that inner true self, outwardly, even if our body is unable to express that. And I think that and this is I say this with the utmost of love and respect. Like, I think that when you've experienced something deeply traumatizing that typically has to do with your sexuality or something inherently linked to your biological sex, that a response you can have to that is saying, well, I can actually remove this, and I can, like, there's actually a different me internally that I would like to express to kind of reclaim some control over something that's been taken or abused in me.
Yep.
And I think that is more often than not a thing and a leading factor there.
You and I were talking, I think in just a private conversation, about the concept of having a covenant with yourself.
Yeah.
And I see that as a big time reality in the transgender story that we're watching unfold.
Yeah.
Is that when we are disassociated from God, when we lose our covenant, well, we all default outside of covenant with God. Mm-hmm. Then the rest of the aspects of our life are at a minimum in danger. They're not automatically the worst they possibly could be.
Right.
But certainly, if we're not in covenant with God, our relationship with everything, whether it's our spouse, whether it's our neighbor, whether it's the country that we live in, the animal kingdom, or even ourselves, is in danger. And trauma, in particular sexual trauma, mm-hmm. is a really surefire way to for the covenant with yourself to be damaged.
Yeah.
By someone else. That's what's so crazy about it, is sexual abuse occurring in someone's life is not the person who's being abused. It's not their choice, but it is going to have an effect on the way they conceive of themselves.
Right. And that's what I think is so beautiful about the gospel, mm-hmm. is that the gospel is a message of redemption and restoration and healing. And so, this sounds like a silly conversation, but it's like if you're speaking to someone who's undergone some pretty serious trauma as a teenager, and maybe they're just a young adult, it's almost like you've got the devil on their shoulder that says, who says that you are what was taken from you? You can be something entirely different. You can be the master of your domain, and your biology doesn't have to define you. You can define that internally. Right. Or you've got the angel on their shoulder saying, this was an awful thing that happened, and you can't change that, but through Christ, there can be healing and restoration and redemption. And in time, maybe not even in this life, you may suffer and struggle with this for the rest of your life, but in time, not only will there be justice for the horrible treatment that you received, there will also be a full and complete restoration to what you've lost.
Right. Yeah, it's a matter of who gets to say who your true self is.
Exactly.
So the transgender story is that your true self exists on a higher plane than mm-hmm. the physical body that you bear, and the Christian story is saying they're the same thing, and there is a transformation that needs to occur in our life, but being in covenant with Christ, drawing near to God, brings about a change that actually now puts us back in balance. Exactly. With who we're supposed to be.
Yeah. And I think about that conversation we had about the covenant of self a lot, because I think that's a really beautiful language of putting it, like that sin actually causes your relationship with yourself to be damaged, mm-hmm. and that you can actually restore that through the gospel. I think that's super cool.
I'm not a psychologist, but I think it's when you have someone who's truly diagnosed with a multiple personality mm-hmm. disorder, it's almost always certainly some serious trauma that caused that.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't just happen in a vacuum. And that's a good example of like, oh my gosh, like if your relationship with yourself is fractured, then one way that we see that manifesting, the consequences of that is multiple selves.
Oh yeah, and even like, disassociation or dissociation is a very common response to trauma that people have, where it's like an escapism that doesn't have an external like stimulus. So you're just internally disconnecting from, whatever may trigger that experience that you had. I think another area that this kind of fits is maybe like not so much an individual trauma, but in like collective trauma. Like I was thinking a little bit about, we haven't done a whole lot of deep diving into like 18th and 19th century Christian culture, but thinking about how our parents and their peers were really heavily indoctrinated in this idea that like heaven is the end goal and heaven is the spirit realm that we are escaping this life to get to. And I was thinking a little bit about the 20th century, and it's just like the 20th century was rough, dude. Like you've got both world wars, you've got the threat of global destruction through the Cold War, you've got even Vietnam, which kind of destroyed Western faith that war could be like kind of a noble thing. So you're just seeing this widespread destruction and bloodshed. Even 9/11, honestly, kind of being this example that these Western monoliths that we build are still so fragile against the fundamentally evil people in the world. Like when you start to see the human condition as very fragile and prone to destruction and death, like I think a natural response is to say, well, what if this is just the waiting room? Like what if this is just this broken place that I stay in for a short period of time? And I think that in the same way that individual abuse can kind of lead to that internal, no, there must be something that transcends this, we can experience that collectively too. And that's where the church tends to attract these kind of Gnostic ideas.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I think that prior to the Great World Wars, up until that moment, a postmillennialism that is, the more I study it, the more unlike it resembles what we would call postmillennialism today.
Oh, interesting.
Like the postmillennialism in America, back in the, like 18th, 19th centuries was very connected to like working to bring about the kingdom of God, specifically connected to America. Yeah. So then when we have these world wars occurring where it's like, oh, maybe things aren't as good as we thought they were, combined with the formation of the nation of Israel, then I mean that's a big part of like the baby boomer and Gen X kind of Christian consciousness is like things are really bad, things are probably going to hell in a handbasket. Yeah. Look at these world wars that occurred. Things are not getting better. Anybody who says that the kingdom of God is advancing is an idiot. Also, the nation of Israel just popped up again. So that's got to be some fulfillment of some prophecy. And then that kind of just leads to this subconscious Gnosticism, which is like, I guess we're just, like you said, the waiting room. Like, I'm just going to try to hunker down until, my little tush gets raptured off of this garbage heap and I go to heaven.
Well, because like everyone talks about the European philosophers after the world wars who kind of jumped into like nihilism and said, Nietzsche, God is dead, like kind of lamenting all of that. And I thought to myself, like, they weren't the only ones that felt the widespread suffering of the Western world just now. And I thought, how did Christians internalize this? And I think that their thought process was, well, I don't think God's dead, but maybe he doesn't live on earth anymore. And that's kind of led to, I mean, like, okay, this is totally just a shot in the dark here, but like maybe even our diminishing view of the sacraments kind of an indicator that like, well, we only say that the bread and the wine is a symbol because we couldn't imagine that God could spectacularly represent himself on earth. Like, it's like we're building, it's like we've created so much distance between where we are today and where God is that yeah, I think we're just continuing to compensate for this cosmic loneliness that we feel, even on a Christian level.
Yep. And even outside of what we would define as the church, we see big time strongholds of Gnostic ideas today. Like we don't really have time to get into this, but whenever we inevitably talk about Mormonism or the Church of Latter-day Saints someday, oh my gosh, like there's so many it's literally just like Joseph Smith put second century Gnosticism in the microwave and hit 30 seconds and pulled it out. And he's like, here you go.
Yeah. Well, dude, it's so... Yeah, I the more I was thinking about it, the more I was like, I think everything is Gnostic. Like Marcionism was Gnostic, Docetism was Gnostic. I was thinking about Star Wars because, you know, their whole idea is like the light and the darkness are kind of this intentional battle, and a big Gnostic idea is the dualism of the evil versus the good. Like every freaking thing is not like, I was thinking of Scientology, where like you have to be like a millionaire and then drop 80 G's to put in what's that, L. Ron Hubbard's pocket so that you can get some, you know, nodes of enlightenment. And I'm like, this is it's all Gnosticism.
Yeah, even the Enlightenment itself.
Right. Yeah. It's just, it's trying to get to that higher plane.
You were prepping for this episode like the Always Sunny meme, weren't you? Like, you're just like, it's over here, it's over there.
It's everywhere. It's crazy. Oh, but the one thing, and we'll say this in close, that I thought was so interesting was that there was one heretic that we talked about who was 100% not Gnostic, and it was Pelagius. And it's because Pelagius was a Celt, and he believed that a good God had to create everything good, and his whole heresy was he didn't believe that humans were born inherently sinful. And I thought to myself, Celts have this beautiful idea of reintegrating the spirit with the physical world. And while Pelagius was a heretic because he took that to too far of a degree, I thought to myself, maybe some good, wholesome, like a good heaping bowl of Celtic Christianity, maybe that's the cure for our Gnosticism, man.
Some Lucky Charms.
Some red balloons and green clovers.
Stupid.
So dumb. Gosh dang it. So dumb. All right. Well, we'll leave you with that, Gem. Yeah, but hey, I'm sure we'll talk about more Gnostic stuff. If you guys are like, oh, we just you know, barely started to scratch the itch, let us know. We'll talk about more stuff. We'll talk about it with you. Give us a call. What's your number, Thomas? 555-911. All right. Thank you guys. We'll chat with you again real soon. Later.